to be here, and I want to begin, really, I want to commend you for a job well done. Little did you know that 14 years ago, when you instituted the random drug testing policies here, that you would be providing an answer to the nation's top concern in 2012. So according to the University of Michigan survey released August 15th, 2011, 4 months ago, when adults around the country were asked, what is your top health concern for children in your community, the overwhelming response was childhood drug abuse. Now, for the first time ever, kids using drugs was the top health concern for adults in this nation. So now the nation has made this a top priority. Now, what I find really interesting is that you, the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School Board, made this your top priority in 1998. And now you have the answer for yourselves and really as a role model for the whole nation now that this has finally worked its way to the top of the national agenda. Now, as you recall, unveiling this pervasive problem began in Kernersville when the Kernersville News surveyed over 1,700 high school students, virtually all the high school students who were at school that day at Glen and East Forsyth. And what they found out is, first we interviewed the adults, and adults thought, well, probably, Kernersville's a pretty pleasant place to live. Probably 10% of our kids have a problem with drugs. Then we interviewed the students. 92% of the students reported that most kids in my school use drugs. And as a matter of fact, they said 70% of the kids at my school use drugs. We can imagine the community was shocked. Now, when we actually had a self-reporting question, and actually the schools did a scientific study also, we found out that in Kernersville, 36% of the kids were abusing drugs. The adults and the kids were both wrong, and Kernersville was sad to find out that it actually followed the national average, because Kernersville doesn't like to be average in the things that count. So something had to be done to help the kids, and this is again where the school board was very open-minded and very generous, because what the board decided, Kernersville had come up with the idea, let's have a random drug testing program, and you, the board, said, if Kernersville needs this, all our kids need this. And you actually made it a county-wide program. And the program was two-legged. It was part mandatory, part voluntary, and it was modeled after Carver High School's very successfully piloted program. Now, the beauty of the program is that I did another whole book on student drug testing, and this is the most generous, respectful, helpful program that I have come across in all my research, because the point is not to punish the kids, it's not to embarrass the kids, it's not to disrespect them. The point of this program is to help kids. If they fail the test, the police aren't called, it doesn't go on their permanent record, the whole school doesn't find out. Instead, as long as they accept free help, as you know, they continue on and nobody knows. The idea is, let's just get these kids back on the drug-free path. But you as a school board didn't leave it at that, and this is what's really commendable, because you created the policy, and a lot of times policy gets created and you move on to other things. But instead, you decided to make sure, does this work, and how does it work? Do we need to tweak it? And the first question you asked the first year was, did the random voluntary testing or the random drug testing, did it really work? Did it reduce drug use? Here's what you found out. In the first 3 months of the program, August, October, the kids pledged, and they said, I'm not going to abuse drugs or alcohol, and drug violations remained exactly the same. In November, when the testing started, drug violations reduced dramatically. Now, that answers a national question, because there's a lot of people who have pledging programs, promise programs. What you proved by your study of this is that pledging doesn't work with kids. It's really the testing that is the power behind the program, because it holds the kids accountable for their words and actions. Now, I also ask a question at the same time. I was the investigative reporter, and I'm just as interested in truth as you are. And I wanted to know, when I went to Glen High School and 87% of these kids enrolled the very first year, I wanted to know, do you feel 87% of your peers really are drug-free? And actually, the kids said, on average, that they thought about 60% of their peers were drug-free. Now, what's interesting is, in 1 year, perception was corrected from most kids in my school use drugs to most kids in my school do not use drugs. And that transformed the whole culture of these schools when they had the higher enrollment numbers. Now, a few years later, the school board asked a question. They noticed that all the schools in the district had the very same program, and yet year after year, and to this day this is true, Kernersville kids in the high schools have 150% more of their students enrolled in the drug testing program, especially the voluntary side of it, and the middle schools have 200% more of their students enrolled than the district average for middle schools and high schools. And of course, you're seeing these figures, and you actually ask at a board meeting, why is that? And I think Angela McReynolds was here at the time, and she pointed it out. Kernersville created Kernersville Cares for Kids, which is actually town leadership driven. The town actually gives us tax money for this. Well, I think the only town in the country that does this. And so what we do with that is we created incentives for the kids, and the incentives were free T-shirts, free wristbands, sometimes just free candy. But the point is the kids saw, they care, the community's doing something. The school board then took it a step further. And what they did is, in 1 year, there were 3 high schools that had over 90% enrollment. And so the school board, again, used this as another opportunity to study the test. Are there any differences? They're all getting the same results. In 2 of the high schools with over 90%, when you did your safety survey, the students reported the same number of sightings of kids under the influence of drugs and alcohol at school. In 1 school, there was a 50% decrease in sightings, even though they all had the same amount of kids in the program. And so, Chris, you're wondering, obviously it wasn't the incentives, because actually all 3 of these schools had incentives that year. They all had about the same number of kids. What was the difference? Well, I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to read it in the books. You probably all heard that I recently released this book, Under the Influence, the Town That Listened to Its Kids, and it could be subtitled, Under the Influence, the School Board That Listened to Its Kids, because that's exactly what you've been doing, is responding also to the kids. Now, this book doesn't just tell the story of Kernersville and its dynamic youth leadership program called Kernersville for Kids. Kernersville Cares for Kids. The book fully honors Carver High School and its pilot program. All the other high schools and all the other middle schools are also mentioned in the book, and when they had successes, we studied it because we learned from each other's successes. Additionally, this book examines 3 recovered addicts, and they tell us in their own words and their own life story, here's why I chose this self-destructive path. And more importantly, for all those parents hurting out there that have kids in that same situation, they each tell you why I turned my life around, what it took to turn me around. In the book, too, is a very personal question answered, personal for me, one that touched my life. I wanted to know, why is it you can have 2 kids in the same family, so same parents, same schools, same neighborhoods, 1 kid never chooses to experiment, 1 kid goes straight down the substance abuse path. And so found people in that situation in Kernersville, changed their names so we could hear their real story, and they answer that question for us, so that's also in there. The book also demonstrates how to build dynamic youth leadership organizations, what kids really want from adults, and most importantly, if I don't have kids, why should I care about this? And what are some key things I can do to help my community, to be part of that village? Some very simple key things. So this is not a book for people who have kids. This is a book for people who care about kids. And then lastly, you know, why did I write the book? And I wrote it, it's 15 years of research, 10 years of writing. I had all these questions myself. I had 3 teenagers when I moved into town, and I have to say, and I think Dr. Martin would agree, virtually every question you could possibly have is addressed in this book. And so, you know, we have the answers. We have a lot of hurting parents and a lot of scared parents out there. It's the #1 health concern. We have the answers here, and I felt like, and it was hard. It's hard to go from writer to publisher, I have to tell you. It's a whole different animal. But I was cheered on by my community, and now we have answers for other people. And this all goes back to the beginning of my presentation. I want to thank you, the members of the board, because none of this would have been possible if you had not listened to your community, your students out there, and if you had not implemented the random drug testing program, none of this would have happened. Now, in your packets, just briefly, if you want to go through them quickly, you're going to see a few things. You're going to see that you have a DVD. This is actually Dr. Martin unveiling the book at an awards banquet, and then the actual program, which Chris Runge was so nice, and it's airing on Cable 2 right now 24 times in January. So, but you've got your own personal edition here, because you're the leaders. Now, you've also got a latest copy of the Kernersville News and 4 student leaders interviewed. So you've got that in your packet. And then Kernersville Magazine. has a full-page story. It's Kernersville's only glossy magazine on a book for all ages. Families are actually reading this book together, and it's creating conversations in families, and young people are reading it also. The last thing that you have in there is a coupon to actually get your own copy of this $25 book. And so the reason, I'd like to tell you personally, I bought 1,000 copies of this book. I believe in this so strongly that I have obligated myself to personally deliver this book, this message, to 1,000 people. And I'm asking you to do the same, not to buy 1,000 copies, but think about buying 1 or 2 copies, learning this fascinating story, and then obligating yourself to pass it forward to 1 or 2 people so that we can take this national role model program and get it the national attention that it deserves, but not so much that, get answers to all these other millions of people that want to know, how can I protect my children, and how can I protect my community and other children, even if I don't personally have children. So when we learn, we teach, and I want to thank you again for allowing me to learn by the actions you took 14 years ago. So thank you for a job well done.
The board actually would like to recognize you. You've made a difference in this community. You've led us through this opportunity. So we appreciate what you've done and how the difference you have made. And we continue to challenge ourselves to try to figure out new and creative ways to deal with this problem in society. So we have a certificate presented in recognition of your support for and commitment to the students whom we serve. This is the 24th day of January 2012. Congratulations and thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert.
Let's give her a big hand. I'm going to let you go through it. Call Steve Oates from Rusty Hall, the Rural Hall Area Business Association.